I am thrilled to be speaking today with Alice Dubois. She is the Director of Product at BuzzFeed. Thank you for joining me today, Alice.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we're really happy to hear about what you do at BuzzFeed. But first of all, how does one get to be the Director of Product? What's sort of your background that led you to this position?
Um, well, I don't know that it's a conventional background, but product is a job that kind of covers a lot of different areas of expertise. And so I think there's a lot of people with unconventional backgrounds. I started out working at the New York Times in the newsroom, in the digital newsroom specifically. So I was working as a web producer on first feature content in the travel section, and then the op-ed section, and the news sections. And I was just basically working on sort of the daily print report and how to translate that to the web. Um, and this was a long time ago. So it was even before phones were, a big way to consume media. And then as I've been doing that for a long time, we had this content management system that everyone sort of hated. And we had a relationship with the engineering side that was sort of like, if something urgent, priority one, terrible happens, the site is down or you can't publish from the CMS, we have this escalation procedure to page them and they'll fix the immediate problem. But if there's any other non-urgent, wouldn't it be nice if the CMS could do X or Y? Then there was really no avenue for having a sort of conversation about that and getting that kind of work done. We might send some requests over there. We had no clue if they were ever going to prioritize them, if they were ever going to do them, if they were ever going to ship them. So I said to my bosses that I felt like it was a little bit demoralizing for the people who worked with these tools to never feel like they were getting any better. They weren't very good and they were never going to get better. And it's one of those situations where then your boss is like, well, why don't you do that job? So I was still doing my sort of normal web production work, but I kind of took on as a project being like the point person for the web newsroom to communicate with the engineering side about changes and improvements that we wanted. And it just grew from there. So it started out with like little things in the CMS. What if it could have a button to do X, Y, Z, just make things more efficient to produce. But then it kind of grew until I was working on a lot of just large projects that had a big engineering or development aspect to them. So a relaunch of a page or launching a new section, that kind of thing. And I really enjoyed it. I found myself sort of finding it more fun and more interesting to think about the puzzle of how to build good tools to publish the journalism than the journalism itself. I was like really gravitate towards it. So it went from being sort of like a little thing I was doing for fun to my whole entire job.
And then that led you to move to BuzzFeed.
Yes. So, at one point we were building from scratch a new content management system, and I was very involved in that at the New York Times. And then a friend sort of sent me an email with a listing, like, oh, this is a job at BuzzFeed to, work on their internal publishing tools. It's perfect for you. BuzzFeed is a super interesting company. Jonah Peretti is the smartest guy in media. You should do it. It would be so fun. You'd have a great time. And I was like, yeah, that would be fun. So that's what happened.
I mean, I like seeing that there's an attention to the CMS because I said in an article several years ago, if your CMS can't do it, that means your company can't do it. I mean, it's much harder and it's not as likely that people are going to be able to do the types of things that you want them to do purely because the CMS can't handle it.
Yeah, and the tools that you use really inform how you think about what's possible to make. So the way you think about what a tweet could be is very different than the way you think about, what a Snapchat could be. And that's like related to the tools and the way that they look and are designed sort of like funnel you into some kind of way, line of thinking, right? And so the tools, if you own the tools, they instead of being kind of an obstacle, they can really be like an accelerator to how you work and how you think.
Absolutely. So talk a little bit about your responsibilities as director of product. What does that mean?
Well, I've switched roles a little bit. I think that director of product, generally the director title, just means that you are probably managing people, which I am doing, and you have a little bit more responsibility for higher level strategic thinking about BuzzFeed's products and what they should be aiming to do, as opposed to a sort of more granular, in the weeds, like implementation of a particular feature. But in my particular product role, I've actually moved to Los Angeles, and now I work on tools that are for BuzzFeed, mostly video creators and publishers, so people who distribute the content. And BuzzFeed puts a lot of its video content on non-BuzzFeed platforms, on YouTube and on Facebook, on Instagram, on Snapchat. My job is that I'm a director of product. I'm specifically a director of product for production tools. So we're focusing on creation tools and kind of workflow management tools that let the content creators at BuzzFeed kind of make interesting things and see what other people have made. I think the big sort of BuzzFeed's changed a lot since I've been here, but I think the kind of persistent through line, the theme of like how BuzzFeed approaches media is you make things, you put them out in the world, you see how they have done, and then you use that data to kind of inform your thinking and iterate and make the next thing. And so having tools that let us really track what we've made and surface the successful things and let people see those and let people iterate against those things is really important for the creative process. As we've gotten big, when we were tiny, everyone kind of knew when you're a little company that's only publishing stuff to the web, I think everybody's very aware of what other people at the company are making and what's doing well. And they can kind of be like, oh, that quiz about, what state should you live in just did really well. I'm going to make a quiz about what city you should live in, and it's easy to iterate. But when you have, when you've grown, you're, 1,500 people, you have people all over the world, and they're publishing content to Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and Snapchat and Instagram and BuzzFeed itself. It's much harder to know what's out there and what's doing well. And so you really do need good tools to be tracking and surfacing this sort of successful content that can be adapted or riffed on.
Right. I think you have a unique perspective on the role of journalism in product management because you've worked for New York Times, which is sort of journalism capital J, and BuzzFeed does journalism, but the role that you're in now is not maybe exactly what would be described as journalism. What do you think are the unique aspects of doing product management in a news or journalism organization?
That, just to pause for a second, that got really buzzy in my ears. Is it sounding okay on the recording? Your side? Okay. And I sound fine too? Okay. Well, I think that when you're focused on capital J journalism, I guess one issue that really jumps out at me is deadlines. These time frames that you're working on, they are really tight. I think one of the hardest, most important things for a good product manager to do is basically to be able to prioritize. You make a lot of lists of things you want to do, and then you have to pick some of those things. You're not going to be able to do them all. And I think that that's sort of exaggerated for journalism. And the content itself is so. That's probably true for everything, really. A good product manager should not only be thinking about the containers for the content. They should be really deeply thinking about the content that's in those containers too. But, I think if I were doing product management specifically for news, or if I were doing back at the New York Times, I would definitely be wanting to be pretty embedded with the teams, sit down there. And again, I think like one thing I love about building internal tools is that I can spend time with users because it's so helpful as a product manager to see the users using the tools to really understand how they work and so on. But um, I think with journalism, like, yeah, just really understanding the news deeply and then understanding how you just have to get stuff out the door on a deadline. It's like putting out a news report. um, but so I think that's probably the trickiest part, I would say.
Right. You started going toward this just a second ago, but what are the skills that you look for when you're hiring product managers?
Um, wow. Well, I could actually go dig up our actual product ladder and tell you some of them if you're interested in me getting really specific. I think you want to have at a high level. I think you want to have somebody who has a good vision for what will be the most useful thing to build. I think just having ideas is not sufficient because it's pretty easy to have ideas. There's lots of people at the company who are going to have ideas. Like, we can come up with a lot of ideas. It's the ability to kind of, in a systematic way, figure out which of those ideas are the most worth pursuing, and then the ability to execute those ideas effectively. And I think sometimes that's like knowing when to do something kind of quick and dirty to test it out, and when to build something really, kind of methodically and carefully. Um, Obviously, understanding engineering and design and business are very important. A product manager is going to be sort of sitting. Data is also hugely important. Like, a product manager is going to be sitting in this position where you have a team that's going to be engineers and designers. Your goal basically is, to sort of grow. Well, your goal is going to depend on the project, but for any given project, you're going to need to set the goal. But it's probably ultimately going to boil down to, you know, uh, audience, site growth, revenue growth, and so you need to be able to communicate really well, and work across a whole bunch of teams to kind of make sure you understand what's important. So I don't know, communication, prioritization, good tech sense, good design sense, leadership skills. Like, I think even a very junior product manager is really kind of leading a team. Most product managers are working with a cross-functional team, and by that I mean some people who do engineering, some people who do design, maybe someone on data science, probably someone who does like QA or product support, and it's ultimately the product manager's responsibility to make sure that team is functioning well together, collaborating. It's not their responsibility to have every idea and tell every single person what to do, but it's their responsibility to kind of make sure that the team dynamic is effective. So I think leadership skills, communication skills, empathy, be good understanding of like data and how to evaluate an idea is useful. How to evaluate whether an idea, you can have an idea and you can execute that idea perfectly, but if it's a very low impact idea and you had your team spend 8 weeks on it, that's not great for BuzzFeed. So sort of picking out the right ideas. Those are all important.
One of the things I've found when I've been talking to different people is that tech sense is sort of implied, and they really emphasize these communication and leadership skills. But what do you mean by tech sense? How much tech needs to be a part of a product manager's job?
I think that varies a lot from company to company. I mean, when I look at it, like, I've seen product manager listings at Google. I don't think Google would hire me as a product manager. They say you need a degree in computer science or some other kind of math or science. We would prefer you to have an advanced degree in that. And I think they tend to want people who are like, have come up through a hard engineering track to be that. But there's also product managers who have come from design backgrounds and think a lot about, the user experience and the design. Um, and there's places that want product managers that have an MBA and that are bringing a really a businessy kind of like your sort of key objective is revenue, and so you need to be thinking about, you're the sort of CEO of the product, is when you hear people say. So I think it depends. I wouldn't be put off by the idea of like, oh, if you didn't major in computer science, you can't do it. Obviously, I'm evidence of the fact that that is not the case. I think you might not be able to do it anywhere. Um, I'm sure the sort of like traditional perfect archetype would be like a CS grad who with an MBA who's got a really good design sense and also right. But something I like about the product team is that it does cover such a wide range of skills, ideally, and nobody's going to really have them all, that you can kind of come in from different angles. But yeah, you basically, I think if you aren't able, like, for sure you're going to end up building software. I mean, I think I do like to say is, as a product manager, your job is not to build software and build products. It's actually to sort of solve problems. And if you can figure out how to solve problems without building something, that's so much better, because any software you build has to be maintained, it has to be updated, it has to be upgraded. It's like suddenly you have this thing that has to be taken care of. So if you can solve a problem by realizing, oh, they're asking for a tool to do XYZ, but they don't need that tool. They just need to maybe change the way they think about doing that work and do it in a different order or stop doing that part of it. Like, that's much better, because you've solved the problem with no work at all. But ultimately, you are going to end up building things. And if you don't have a clue about how engineering works, and you don't know whether if you say, well, I need you to change that text label, okay, that's going to take 5 minutes. And I need you to build something to handle video archiving. It's like, that could be a 6-month project. If you don't have some sense of what you're asking for and how it might be done, and whether there are simpler solutions that could be done that would be sufficient, even if they're not maybe ideal, like, it's hard. I would say, I mean, it certainly is it's not my area of greatest strength. I've gotten to a place, because I've done it long enough, that I kind of describe it like it's as though my grandparents speak a language and I don't actually speak. I couldn't sit down and write an essay in that language, but when I hear people speaking, I kind of know what they're talking about. It's sort of like that. I'm not an engineer. I can do a little bit of code changes, like here and there. I can change some HTML and like add a few little things, but I can't really sit down and build a product by myself, even a hacky one. But I guess the way to get it is, I mean, if you can sort of, teach yourself HTML or take some classes or build a few things, and just until you get a sense of how software engineering works, front end versus back end, like where data is stored, how hard it is to display stuff, and like that. Once you start to get an understanding of how that works, I think it's enough.
I like that metaphor of a foreign language where you can kind of understand enough to get by, but you couldn't write in that language perfectly.
Yeah.
And so you started going into the next area that I wanted to ask you about is, my interest in this has to do with teaching students who are communication graduates, but might be really tech savvy, that this might be a potential role for them in their career. Maybe not an entry-level role, but something that they might be able to do like you have sometime down the road in their career. So what advice do you have for students or early career professionals that would help them be able to turn their career in this direction?
Well, I think one great thing to do is either where you're working or on your own with a friend or two or something, is try to get your feet wet and do it. Maybe it may be sort of intimidating to be like, by yourself, have an idea and build it. But, maybe an engineer and you can sort of hack around on the weekends on a project. Maybe at your job there are engineers and you can like start to get to know them. I mean, I think it's sort of annoying to just be like, oh, hey, can I pick your brain? Just like, will you take time out of your schedule and tell me everything you know? But if you have some useful idea or request and you could talk to them and just like start up those conversations. I mean, for me, it was like volunteering to sort of be the point person between my department and the engineering department that didn't have any formal or established way of communicating. And so, I was able to kind of learn on the job. But it's pretty easy to sort of build a website and buy a domain and put something up. And another thing you could do, I mean, of course, you can read books. That'll help a lot, but getting real world practice is always really useful. Actually being in the position of having to sort of make decisions about what should or shouldn't go into a product. You could look at you can look at products that you use every day and start to sort of think critically, like, how would I make this better? What do I like? Why do I like this product? It's my favorite product. Why do I like it? What would I change about it if I could? Why do I hate this product? What would make this product better? Just sort of challenging yourself to like think in that mode, I think can be good for those skills. Yeah.
I think that's really good advice. I mean, I'm always encouraging students to make things. I think that they don't realize how much employers look at the things that they do in their spare time. They want to see that, you've had a passion project or a hobby, you started a website. It might even just be like a WordPress blog that you're writing about this, or it could be, much more detail where you're doing a website on a hobby, or you're starting to work with data analysis. But I also like this idea of critiquing sites as well. So that's all good. That's all good news for our new degree in digital media innovation, because that's definitely the direction we like to send people. Just to wrap things up, how do you view the future of product management, particularly as it relates to journalism and media companies? It's kind of an emerging role in journalism organizations, and you've worked in journalism organizations. Where do you see it going in the future? It's crystal ball time.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I mean, obviously all news organizations are becoming are focusing much more of their time and resources on digital stuff. It doesn't, it's a role that, like, I think there are news organizations that can, obviously I do the job, so obviously I think it's important and valuable, but they're like Huffington Post had no product managers and they still had, an interesting product and they were able to innovate. So,
I think there are people that are doing product management functions who might not be called product managers. I think in certain organizations they may be editors, but they are managing digital products. And so a certain set of sensibilities and skills need to be acquired in those roles, right?
Yeah, when I was at the New York Times, I was never on the product team per se. I was actually in a newsroom role. My editor was my title, like special projects and development or something was my title. And yeah, when I went to interview for the job, it was like, well, no, I haven't officially been in the product org at the New York Times, but the day-to-day of my job is making decisions about these products on behalf of the users. So the skills are there. Yeah, I think that's true. I'm thinking back to like Erin's team at the New York Times. I'm not really, they did a ton of really interesting, great work without working with product managers. I think, yes, the number of people who sort of sit at the intersection of like caring about the content, the technology, the design, and ideally the audience and the revenue too are important. What's hard in the newsroom, I think, is that a lot of people in the newsroom care a lot about like the news, the technology, and the design, and maybe don't necessarily think about the revenue because there has always been this kind of wall. Like, it's not your job. You're the news team. You're not the business side. It's not your job to think about the business side. And the news industry is not not doing well enough that they don't need to think about the revenue. So I think that might be the tricky part. I don't know how organizations are handling that, but whether it's new editors themselves who are sort of actually given responsibility for revenue, or whether a product person would be involved from the business side to kind of make sure that any interesting, cool thing that is being built can also make money, I would say.
I think there's definitely lots of potential going in that direction. And actually, one of the quotes that I heard Aaron say in a talk that he had given a few years ago was that it was actually a few years in that I realized I was leading a product development organization. So I think in many media companies, journalism companies, that happened to them. It kind of snuck up on them. Oh, we're managing all these digital products. We need to manage them like they're software products, and we need to kind of learn from that industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair to say.
I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
I don't know. I feel like crystal ball questions aren't my totally strongest suit. I'm more of a like concrete specifics person. So I don't know if I have like big predictions about what's going to happen with product and journalism.
I definitely think the revenue part, the business part, and integrating that is the key direction, and it's going to be tricky and it's going to be a bit complex. There are no easy answers for that.
Yeah, it's true. I agree with that. What else?
I just wanted to thank you so much for spending some time with me this morning. I think this is really great insight that'll be very, very helpful to the students of this class. So thank you very much.
Thanks I enjoyed being a part of it.